Good evening. Hello. Well, I'm sorry about that. We've had our internet connection go down now 2 Sundays in a row, around about sort of quarter to 8 o'clock-ish. So I'm sorry if you've been waiting for a couple of minutes. Um, just check that. Yes. Yep. I think we're fully up and running now. Everything's back to normal. Hope you've had a good week. Oh, tonight I want to talk a little bit about our reaction to some of the things that we are witnessing. Last weekend, as many of you know, was Glastonbury Festival, and last Sunday night I talked about my response to some of the things that were happening, and particularly some of the controversies of the weekend. But I didn't really address some of the things which come out of it simply as a great gathering of people. And then this weekend we've had the British Grand Prix, and again there's a large gathering of people, all together for one purpose, all with something that they're very passionate about, all having made a great effort to be there, many of them having spent a significant amount of money, having saved up for a long time so they get to go to one of these events. Meanwhile, around the world, there are images of huge gatherings of people in protest, whether it's some of the protests that have been happening in America or here in the UK. And whether they are large groups or small groups, those images tend to produce quite a strong response, quite a strong reaction emotionally from us. Sometimes it depends whether or not we share the passion of the crowd, whether we are in agreement with the cause of the protest, or whether there is something that they're celebrating which we also wish to celebrate. Sometimes it depends a little bit if the crowd looks like us or sounds like us, if the slogans that they shout or that they wave on their placards are slogans that we agree with or that we even understand. And so as I was thinking about this evening, I've been thinking more and more about our reaction to crowds of people, to this gathering of humanity, whether they're gathering around a cause or gathering because they have a great affinity or affection for something or someone. And so tonight I thought we'd have a look at how Jesus responds to crowds. And because not all crowds are necessarily a positive thing, and not all crowds are necessarily benevolent, I thought we'd have a look at how Jesus reacts to a crowd who, to be honest, are being a real nuisance. A crowd that he wasn't trying to gather, a crowd that he was, in fact, trying to get away from. And yet his reaction has a real challenge to those of us who consider ourselves to be his disciples. I don't know what you've been watching recently. I don't know if you've seen the footage of those various events. I don't know if you've seen the footage of the refugee camps from the various war zones and conflicts of the world, or of the people that have returned to parts of Gaza in the aftermath of the initial ceasefire, only to discover that they're not safe, and now there are huge groups of people that are fully displaced with nowhere to go, no shelter, no supply, no food, no comfort, none of the things that we would take for granted. So I don't know if you've been paying attention to those things or not, but either way, when we think about how Jesus responds to the crowd, it teaches us a little bit of how we should be responding to the demands of people around us. This is Mark 6, starting at verse 30. It's the beginning of a very famous passage, but we're not going to get to the feeding of the crowd. First of all, we need to address Jesus' initial response. Mark 6, verse 30. Then the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. And he said to them, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest for a while." For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. But the multitude saw them departing, and many knew him and ran there on foot from all the surrounding towns and cities. They arrived before them and came together to him. And Jesus, when he came out of the boat, saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. And the story continues, as many of us are familiar with. He teaches them all through the day until the evening comes. And then he turns to his disciples and says, well, you should feed them. And on the back of that, we have the story of the feeding of the 5,000. Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest for a while, for there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. You know, there are several times in Jesus' life where we see the level of stress and strain that he's under. There are times when his family beg him to stop, to slow down. There are times when his disciples say he's beside himself. How could he possibly continue? And yet Jesus responds to this crowd that have followed him and his disciples, even though they're trying to get away from it all, with mercy, with compassion. And he views them, it says, as sheep without a shepherd. You know, sometimes when we see these gatherings of people, they can cause us to respond on the basis of our opinion of their cause. You know, the crowds that followed Jesus, there were some that were looking for honest answers, but many were just looking for a handout. There were some that were looking to encounter God in person. And there are others who were just wanting to start a controversy, have a theological debate. There were some that were there to hear what he had to say, and there were some who were there to trip him up, to try and trap him in his own words. And so here we are, and in our generation, we see the crowds that gather. We see these multitudes of people. We see these groups of people with different identities, and how we respond to them, I think, is an expression of how we manifest the character and the person of Jesus Christ. You see, if I don't respond out of compassion, I have to ask myself, why not? You see, the demands on him were very different to any demands that I might be facing. The demands on him would have overwhelmed you or I. People coming with problems that no human hand could solve, no human intervention could help. And yet for Jesus, he was able, because of his divine authority and power, to meet those needs. Remember the story of the woman who touches the hem of his garment. It's another occasion where Jesus is surrounded by crowds, and as soon as she reaches out and just touches the hem of his garment by faith, he stops and he turns and he says, "Who touched me?" The Bible records this, that he said that he knew because power had gone out of him. There was one person who reached out and touched him, but now we have crowds gathered and making demands of him. Sometimes we hear the demands of the world around us, or we see the desires of the crowds that gather, and we feel that they're unreasonable. We feel that they've gone too far. We feel that maybe they are undeserving of the things for which they're calling out. Jesus had compassion on the crowd because they were like sheep, not having a shepherd. He could see that in reality they were defenseless. He could see that in reality they had no sense of direction or purpose. He could see that for all of the attributes that the different groups in those crowds might have had, that he alone had an answer for them. And so even though his intention had been to spend a quiet moment resting with his disciples, Jesus responds to the needs around him. Now, this last week, I've seen a lot of people expressing their opinions about who deserves compassion, who deserves mercy, who deserves kindness, who deserves even to have their sicknesses cared for and their bodies healed. Jesus doesn't make an assessment of the achievements or the merits of the crowd. He has compassion on them because they are precisely just like sheep with no shepherd, clueless, lost, prone to falling into traps or over cliffs or into deep water, not knowing where to find what they need in pasture, not able to make their way back to the fold. Jesus sees these crowds and he understands their position. And so even though he's at the end of himself, and even though his disciples could do some one-on-one time in the quiet of a deserted place, he has compassion on them. He doesn't say, these aren't my people. It's tempting sometimes to say, well, I'll look after my own. I'll deal with the needs of my own. I'll speak to the circumstances of my own people. But the reality is this: God doesn't ask us to take care of the people that we love, or the people that we think are like us, or the people that we agree with. And he sends his disciples out in that picture of the master sending out his servants. He demands that they go out into the highways and the byways and compel folk to come in, to break down every barrier, to bring those who knew about it and those who didn't, those who wanted it and those who didn't, to plead with people, to encourage, to motivate people, to compel them to come in. When you look at the crowds of our time, of our generation, whether they're identifiable because of their issues and their politics, or they're identifiable because of their fandom and the people that they admire, or they're identifiable because of the way they've gathered to a particular cause. No matter what dividing characteristic might be the way in which they define themselves, Jesus still sees those crowds today, and he still has compassion on them, and they still appear as sheep without a shepherd. And his desire is that they too would come, that they would be welcomed into his kingdom, that they would receive his life, that they would experience his healing. And so we, in our compassion, that love with which he first loved us, as we allow him to cause us to respond and react according to his love for those people, we're going to need him to do a work in us. We're going to need his spirit to enable us to be shelter for them, to speak his truth to them. And yes, if the moment comes when he says, you feed them, to do just that. You see, if we really love the crowds of our day, we're going to go to him first and say, give us what we need to be a blessing to these people, to transform the lives of these people, to change their futures, and to build relationship with them. to welcome them into the fold of Almighty God, so that they are no longer sheep without a shepherd, but a people who know that they are guarded, that they are preserved, that they are protected, that they are loved by the God for whom are all things and by whom are all things. So the next time you see images or you encounter in your daily life, in your community, a crowd, and you think about that crowd that maybe you don't agree with them, or you don't like the look of them, or they're behaving in ways that you don't necessarily want to see or to have going on in your environment, remember this, that they are sheep without a shepherd. And the thing that will transform them for the good, for the better, the thing that will make them new is the compassion of Jesus Christ. We have a responsibility to love people, to welcome people, to care for people, but to do it under the authority and the guidance of Jesus. We need to see beyond the placards. We need to see beyond the banners. We need to see beyond what the politicians of our day say about them. And we need to love them for the simple reason that they are all people for whom Jesus died, just like us. That's our thoughts for this evening. The Lord bless you. Have a great week. God willing, we'll not have the same problems with the connection next week. So thank you for bearing with us. And don't forget, you can get in touch with the details that pop up below these videos once the live stream has ended. God bless. Have a great week.